Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Spotlight. This is, of course, our show where we talk to creators and the folks that make the stuff we love. And I'm super excited. And I'm glad that I'm prepared to say your name the right way because a lot of people will look at my wife said it to me earlier this week. You're talking to the Karate Kid this week? But this is Marvel Comics own Ralph Macchio joined me.
That's it. Perfect pronunciation.
Boom. And one of the notes I had does actually say it's funny because I make myself a little short bit of notes and just past it. It says Macchio is not related to the actor Ralph Macchio, but his
Right.
nickname Karate Kid after that actor's famous role. It also says you share a birthday with Stan Lee. Would have never
You
known
said
that.
December 28th. Yes.
Awesome. Very good. Well,
Yes.
I'm super psyched to have you here. I've had the privilege of talking to many of your Marvel and DC colleagues in the last year and a half since I've been doing this program. So I'm always loving having one of you guys on because you guys are always interested in talking about stuff that I care about as a long-term Marvel reader. So let's get it started. Whoops, I had a brief pause. But yeah, let's get started let's talk about how you got rolling in this business.
Okay. It was actually quite accidental. My secret origin story. I had gone to a convention in New York City in 1975, and I was not a convention goer. I was a letter writer. I heard Jack Kirby was going to be there. The word got out, and I said, "Oh, I want to bring in some Thors to have him sign." Well, convention was a brand new thing to me. He
Right?
was there. That was the convention that he met Joe Sinnott because apparently they'd worked together for like decades,
Oh,
and
wow.
they never met. So as I was leaving the convention, this is one of those things that it could have gone either way. I was out in the lobby and I was pushing the door to leave, and I heard someone mention the Black Panther elsewhere in the lobby, and I turned, and somebody was sitting at a table talking about the Black Panther, and I guess Don McGregor, the writer of the Panther and Killraven, was sitting out in the lobby area, and he had a table and he was signing Black Panther books. So I went over to him and I said, I'd love to get you to sign a Panther book for me or Killraven. My name's Ralph Macchio. I was a prolific letter writer. At that time, I was in graduate school at Montclair State in New Jersey. And so this was great writing exercise to sit down and to compose my thoughts and all and to send letters into Marvel. So he goes, "Hey, I remember, all the letters you wrote into Killraven and the Black Panther." He goes, "You know what? If you hang around for a while," he goes, "how'd you like to take a tour of Marvel?" And it was awfully nice of him to offer. It was local because the convention was in Manhattan. I lived in New Jersey. I drove in by car. So he took me up to Marvel. We walked around and everything. Chris Claremont, who was just beginning on the X-Men, was up there. And Chris at the time was also working on Iron Fist, and he was the editor of Marvel's fan magazine, which was Foom,
Oh,
Friends of
yeah.
the World. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was about 10 years before I was reading, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Yes, very, very cool thing. And he goes, "Hey, I read all the letters that you wrote to the Iron Fist book and to my X-Men stuff." He goes, "I was very impressed." He goes, "Obviously, you can write." He goes, "I'm looking for somebody to write an article on Conan because we're doing an issue devoted to Conan. I think it was issue 17. I'm not exactly sure." He goes, "And to interview Roy Thomas." So I said, "Oh, that's fantastic." Now, at the time, Roy was trying to decide whether he was going to come back as editor in chief at Marvel or whether he was going to go out to the coast, West Coast, and seek fame and fortune out there in Hollywood. So I would come up on Fridays to interview him. Meanwhile, I was writing the article on Conan, and he was just too busy to do the interview because he had a million things to do. It was like the only day of the week he was coming up there. So I had a chance to just kind of hang out at Marvel. I said, I'm up here. I'm still in graduate school, and I got to know everybody up there. All the guys were working up there at the time. Roger Stern, Steve Englehart was around, Gerber, all those guys, and Don McGregor, of course, was on staff. Marv Wolfman, and I said, weeks would go by, and I got friendly with him. I'd go out to movies with him. I'd go out to lunch and hang out. Eventually, I did get the interview with Roy, and it was very, very nice. He was very forthcoming and everything. And ultimately, as you know, he decided not to come back as editor in chief, but to go out to the coast. And at that point, I believe it was either Marv or Archie became editor in chief. But what happened was when Archie got promoted, he was the editor of the black and white magazines back then. Planet of the Apes, Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, Doc Savage, things like that. So when he got promoted, John Warner, who was his assistant, I had gotten very friendly with, and he needed an assistant because now he was the editor of that line. So he asked me if I would come on. And I said, I'm in graduate school. I was hoping maybe to get my master's so I could go out and teach English. But at that time, teaching jobs were scarce. So I said, maybe I could continue my graduate studies, but come on staff. And ultimately, that's what I did. I came on staff with John as his assistant in 1976, and I stayed there for 35 years. I never left. So,
Fantastic. Right, nicey. So, like so many great origin stories, as it were, it was right place, right time. Took a tour, talked to a guy. Somebody had a need. You stepped in. I had a great interview recently with Joe Duffy, who, was, of course,
of
who
course,
had
yes.
very much. He said, "I stuck around. I did whatever somebody threw at me, and I turned it into a career." So, I love that. I love hearing. That's one of the main reasons I love doing this. Is I love hearing your guys' stories like that. It's totally awesome.
Well,
Um,
Charlie, when you say talk about that, when people come to me at conventions and go, "How did you get into Marvel? And can I imitate that?" I said, "You can't.
It's lightning in a bottle.
Right place, right time."
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, a title that I absolutely loved, and again, my history with Marvel is my first Marvel comic was the Star Wars comic. It was issue 60 in 1982. I was 6. I was born in 1976. I know.
Hey, you
But
I
it
started.
I know, you just said. And it was kind of another, and then Indiana Jones, The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones was the other title I read. So it was another 4 years before a kid, I was 10, that another kid on the playground showed me a Spider-Man comic, and then I was a superhero guy. But I quickly discovered, and again it was in back issues because the title had already ended, Marvel 2 in 1. Because I love the Fantastic Four. That was the title that my brother followed, and I read some of his issues. And then obviously, Marvel Team Up was the Spider-Man version of that, which had also ended by that point. But I
Sure.
was always kind of curious, and you were on that for a while, according to my notes.
Yes, I was.
But I'm always curious, and again, I would ask the same question about Spider-Man, and that is that, did you find it was like the thing, and then like Tigra drops by, and then they do a thing, and it's 22 pages, and then the issue's over? Kind of finding a way to keep that going organically. Was it challenging? Did you have kind of a methodology that made it easy? Like, kind of tell me about the process, and maybe a story about a really tough one, or one that you were like, dang, we really did it. This was a beaut.
Well, I can certainly tell you about my two-in-one story. Actually, there was an issue that I had scripted that was before I came on the book, and that was plotted by Chris Claremont and drawn by John Byrne. And
Oh,
it had Luke Cage in it, guest starring with Spider-Man, and it was about a big fire in Manhattan and all that.
oh,
And
I can picture the cover. Yeah.
the cover, right? And I got asked to script it, which I thought was very nice because I was a very inexperienced scripter. So I did have one foot in the door there, on two and one. Now, what happened later was that Roger Stern, who's a terrific guy, I wish he'd go to more conventions and everything. He's like one of the unsung heroes of Marvel. Huge
I'd love to
company.
talk to him, but I know that he doesn't do stuff like this.
It's unfortunate because he's got so many things to say, and he was at Marvel before I was. He was kind of like one of the mentors for me when I was up there. At one point, he asked me if I would want to write a couple of issues of Marvel Two in One. So I said, "That's very nice of you to offer, Roger." And I went home that weekend and I thought about it. Now, this was at the time in the late 70s when we were having an energy shortage here in the United States. Jimmy Carter
Right.
was president and gas shortage, the lines were a mile long. So I thought, rather than just write two issues where you just sort of guest star someone and then that's it, I wanted to leave a footprint in the Marvel universe. And my inspiration for that was what Jack Kirby did when he went over to DC and he created the DNA Project in Jimmy Olsen, which was a lot of fun. And I said, Kirby left a footprint for himself because even though he was done with it when he left Jimmy Olsen, the DNA Project existed and it was there and other writers could come in. So I thought, well, obviously, I'm not going to rip off what he did, which was about genetics. I said, well, what's relevant today? What's a topical thing? And I thought, energy, because we're having an energy crisis in this country. So I created Project Pegasus, and I used
Right.
as a name for that Pegasus because the winged horse gave the sense of motion. It was a good visual. It also
Yeah.
indicated energy and power. And also, I learned to ride a horse at a place called Pegasus Stables.
Nice.
It was great. And then I decided that I would have a lot of it underground because I used Project Wildfire as my thing from the Andromeda strain.
Right.
by Michael Crichton. So I was taking from different things to pull it all together. And I brought in the first script to Roger Stern, and he was very, very impressed. He really liked it and everything. I had Captain America guest star in there with the thing. And then I had a second part, and he got John Byrne to draw the second part. So I said, wow, that's fantastic too. I mean, Sal is great, and so is John. So we did the two-parter. And then I said, okay, I've left, I've got a footprint in the Marvel Universe. Project Pegasus exists. We're relevant because it's about energy and it's about sources of energy, alternative sources, which, by the way, they used a lot of in the Captain Marvel film.
Oh yeah, yeah, they did. And it was the beginning of the Avengers, the 2012 movie. They destroyed it. That was
That's
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was all right, but that was all in there. So, so at that point, I said, "Okay, I've done my thing." Now, a few months or weeks later, my old buddy Mark Grunwald, who also was up there as an editor,
Legend.
to
Legend.
say that my Mark is not still around because he'd be a fantastic guy. He was the heart and soul of Marvel. He came to me and he said, Ralph, I really love that two-parter that you did. He goes, I've got an idea for us to map out a six-part story, all taking place in Project Pegasus. And he showed me this basic outline that he had. And I looked at it and I said, Mark, this is great. If we flesh this thing out and we can get it approved. Now, I forget if Roger Stern was still on as editor or if Jim Salicrup had come on. I don't want to insult either guy because both of them are fantastic editors. But we approached the editor at that point, and either Roger or Jim said, "Hey, I like this." So we got the go ahead to do it, and we were gifted like from heaven because we got John Byrne to draw the first three parts and George Perez to draw the second three parts.
Such a
And we had
legend.
a lot of fun. We guest starred Thundera and we guest starred Wondar, who we made into the Aquarian.
Right.
And we had Giant Man in there, and and we wanted to make sure though the key thing that Mark and I emphasized with ourselves was that as much as we were dealing with cosmic stuff and all that, and the cosmic cube was part of this, and all these other characters, it was the thing that was the center of the book. And so anything that was going on when we came time to do the climax and the final part, we wanted the thing to be front and center and not just sort of pushed off to the side as like another guest star. So
Right.
we thought that was very important. And truthfully, between us, we just wanted to upshot the Fantastic Four. We wanted to show them we could do something in the two and one that was even better than the FF. I don't know if we did, but that was our goal, was to say, hey, we're doing FF stuff in this book. So we had
Absolutely.
great artists. And after that, we did the Serpent Crown Affair. George stayed on for two of those issues. He wasn't able to do the third part, but we got a very able penciler to do. Jerry Bingham did the third part. That was beautiful. And then we stayed on after that. Jim Salicrup or Roger, they liked what we were doing, and we continued. We had another artist come on, Ron Wilson, and we played around with it. Now, people have often asked, well, how did you divide up the writing? Because you guys were a team. They used to call us the 2-in-1 twins.
Yeah.
And well, what happened is Mark and I would agree on the plot. One of us would go off and type it up because back then you were doing a plot. We were not doing full scripts. So we did plots. We would go back and forth until we were happy with the plot, send it to the artist, either George or John. When it came back, we would divide up the pages. And Mark would like do the pages that had Wondar on them because he liked Wondar, made him into the Aquarian, and also Quasar because that was a
Right.
character that right later on he got in his own monthly book. And I would do Thundera, and I would do the Thing because I had a more of a gift for writing that kind of vernacular than Mark did coming from the Midwest.
Right.
I could do the New York thing,
Yancey Street.
the
Yeah.
old Yancey Street setup. So that was more fun. So that's how we divided up the writing. And then when we came, each issue, we wanted to make sure that everything worked out fine. And we went over each other's scripts and we edited each other. And then when we were finally happy with ourselves and our work, we passed it on to the editor. And then after that was over, we said, we just did a heavy six-parter. So we talked to George about doing kind of a goofy one-parter. And what followed, which a lot of people seem to forget, is we had the Impossible Man for one issue after that. And that was just a silly one-shot kind of a thing. We even
Dessert.
ripped off the Hitchcock psycho scene where the thing is in the shower, and George did it exactly like the movie where you first see the water coming here from the shower head and then the door opening with the shadow behind it and someone raising a knife and all. So we played around with that, and
Yeah.
George even guest starred the three of us in a panel or two,
Oh
which
my
was a lot of
gosh.
fun. So
I've
after
got to go back. Yeah. I don't know
good.
if you're all familiar with Marvel Unlimited, the subscription service where you can read issues, but I've had it for years and years.
Oh,
Almost every issue of Marvel 2-in-1 is there. So I think I will this week have to go back and read that because it's been years and years. I also have I have it in the years ago. Marvel produced these bound volumes in black and white called Marvel Essentials. I've got all of Marvel 2-in-1
yes,
that
I
way.
do too. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go back and check you out. So, all right, shifting gears to talk about editing. So you had huge runs on Daredevil, Thor, Cap. You jumped in with Spider-Man. I'm a big Spider-Man guy, as you can tell from what's in my
I can
background.
tell.
That's in
Yeah,
my shirt, The Amazing Michigan.
yeah.
Um,
5 years.
you came on board after the Clone Saga, thank God, because the Clone Saga. I was getting out of high school, going into college when that was going on, and I will admit it kind of shook my faith in reading Spider-Man for a while, and then the Ultimate Universe, which was a personal favorite of mine because like the Ultimate Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and all those different books.
Right.
So we just spent a lot of time talking about writing. Talk to me about kind of editing, kind of compare contrast. What do you love about editing? What do you dislike about editing, maybe compared to writing, and kind of the overall experience?
Certainly. Well, one thing I did want to correct you on though was I even
Please.
after the Clone Saga, I came in midway through because they
Oh, okay.
previous editor go, and Bob Harris, who had just become editor in chief, called me in the office and he said, "Ralph," he goes, "we got to fix this thing, and we got to do this fast." So I had to do all these things. We had not decided on any big villain behind it at that point. The previous team that was on the Clone Saga on the Spider-Man books, they were going to have Harry Osborn as the character who had been behind all this. Bob felt that Harry didn't quite fit the bill. So the two of us sort of sat there and said, "How about Norman? It's a crazy thing and all." So we decided we'd bring Norman back. We got rid of the baby. We did all this stuff. But anyway, I just wanted you to know. So I finished up the Clone
Please.
Saga and
Thank
then
you.
stayed on there for 5 years. But as far as editing goes, when I came on staff, editing was not seen as a career, really. Most of the people who were editors at that time, and they weren't really editors, they were kind of proofreaders at that time. We didn't. It was Jim Shooter who brought in the idea. He was imitating the whole DC thing of having editors having separate books. Marvel did not have that at that time. They had an editor in chief, an executive editor, and then really a bunch of proofreaders kind of underneath it, except for the magazine line, which was separate. So I had a different view because at that time you came on staff only long enough until some books opened up so you could leave staff and become a full-time writer. That was sort of being on staff was like your gateway to getting books to leave staff. Englehart did it, McGregor did it, Marv did it, Len, all those guys did it. I felt differently. I found that I liked the office atmosphere. I like working with people, and I like the idea of having sort of control over all aspects of the book. When you're a writer, the only thing you control is the writing aspect. Art, lettering, coloring, covers, that's all outside your domain. But as an editor, you really run the show. And I kind of like that. And again, I like working with people. What Even though I've done a lot of writing for Marvel and continue to do so, the reason I did not leave staff like everyone else after a few years was because I didn't like the solitary nature of writing, and I still don't. I did not like sitting alone in a room, thinking up ideas, turning in a script and being done with it. I like going into a business. I like going into an office, interacting with people. And I found that I had a nice way of dealing with freelancers and creators and all that to try to bring the best out in them. And I was more interested in doing that than myself becoming a mainstream writer, even though along the way I did a good deal of writing. So that's my feeling about it is I like editing
Excellent.
a lot more than writing.
Awesome. All right. So this next, my prop bit won't work if the information I read is incorrect. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Do you remember these guys?
Oh yes, Chris Starr and Moltar. Those okay. I'm
Yeah, this is from the Marvel Legends line, which I'm the other side of the screen here is my enormous collection of Marvel action figures, which
sure.
I don't. I'm a grown man. I don't play with them. They're statues.
No,
But that title, that Kristar the Crystal Warrior, is my notes say you co-created that with John Romita Jr., who I would love to talk to. I was after Bob Layton. I said, introduce me to John Jr. Introduce me to
no,
John Jr. we'll see if it happens. From the time I read it, and I think I've been going back and collecting the back issues because I think they're only available in print. The comics I collect these days myself are just old out of print stuff. I go and I flip through the dollar bins at a show, and that's the only real reason I go to
It's
Comic Cons
cool. I
besides
get it.
working and meeting people like you. But I was always so sure that Crystar was from a fantasy novel or from a role playing game or something. And it was only within the last few years that I discovered it was original IP. It was something you guys created.
Yes.
So and it was so quirky and weird. But tell me about how that came around. I mean, I've always been super curious.
I'd be very happy to. What happened was, at the time, we had a lot of licenses from toy companies, whether it was Hasbro,
Yep.
Remco, you name them. And I sort of at one point, I was sort of like the toy office because I had Micronauts, I had Rom, I had He-Man, I had US-1, I had a lot of the toys. So Jim Shooter had this idea, which was a very good one, which was we, Marvel, would create a toy product and we would license it. We would do a comic, but at the same time, we would license it ourselves and make the money on it to whatever toy company wanted it. And they would do the action figures and all that, but it would be a Marvel created and owned property. So Mark Grunwald and I were in a meeting with Jim, and he said, "You guys come up with it." He really didn't give us any direction or anything. He said, "Just think about what exists already and what we could do that would be saleable." So Mark and I looked at ROM and the Micronauts, and we said, and Transformers, by the way, and we realized you have the real good guys, Autobots and Decepticons. And when you go to ROM, you have the Galadorians and you have the Dire Wraiths. So when you go to the Micronauts, you have Baron Karza and the Micronauts. And the good guys and the bad guys, very well defined, very well defined. So we said, all right, let's come up with something that would really be simple, but very visual, and let's see if it flies. So Mark and I sat down, and with John Jr. doing the visuals, we came up with Crystar. And we said, that's a nice visual thing. He's all crystal. He owns a crystal or runs a crystal kingdom and everything like that, all kinds of Tolkien sort of warriors and everything.
Right.
And we were looking for then a major antagonist. And we said, well, what's the opposite of something that's crystal? That's very hard edged and all that. And we said something that's molten, something that's liquidy and drippy and all that. So he said, how about Moltar, the lava guys and all that? So that's how Moltar came about and all of his minions. And we said, okay, now we got kind of a toy concept and we can pit the two of them against one another. When we did the comic, I edited the comic, but it was Joe Duffy who wrote it. So that was the funny
Joe.
thing is I didn't wind up writing the comic, and Joe did a
Yeah.
fabulous job on it. I mean, she was incredibly creative.
She's great.
She's great to talk to, and as a creator, I love not only that, but working with her. I was Denny O'Neill's assistant when she was doing Power Man and Iron Fist, and can't say enough good things about Joe Duffy.
Yeah.
But so we did that, and I think Ricardo Villamonte was our artist on it, and the book lasted about 12 issues. What was nice, uh, I have to say, because you're talking about how you collect these things, somebody at a convention brought up some Crystar books for me to sign, and I said, you know what? Even though I edited that book, I never collected it. And the guy, I wish I could remember his name because I'd like to give him another shout out. He said, Ralph, he goes, I'm going to find all 12 issues to of the Crystar, and I'm going to mail them to you. And I thought, well, okay, saying that now because we're at a convention,
Right.
and he did. And they were
Wow.
all put in a perfect plastic bag and the whole thing. I said, what a nice guy. So now I have all 12 issues
That's
of Crystar.
fantastic. I'll have to check my stock, but I have a few. I have a few, but now I'm motivated to finish them, particularly, knowing kind of Joe's involvement. So,
And that's how
um
it came about.
yeah, absolutely. All right, I have a bonus question from my partner Kurt, who usually feeds me great questions. But my notes say you retired from Marvel in 2011. That's what the published account said. So looking back over, I mean, gosh, that's now over 15 years. Looking back at Marvel, you had mentioned you did a story around one of the Ant-Man movies, so that wasn't too long ago. How do
Oh,
things look different to you now? Just even kind of dipping your toe back in the water, or whatever kind of interaction you have.
well, it's interesting because I left after 35 years on staff in 2011, but I never lost my connection to Marvel. And in fact, um, after I left, I did consulting editing when Marvel got the Conan books back because I had
Oh,
a
wow. Okay.
yeah. So I was behind the scenes. If you look at those Conan issues, you'll see me listed as consulting editor. I work with Mark Paniccio, Mark Basso, who's the editor. And so I was involved in every aspect of the Conan books while they were at Marvel. And also when Nick Lowe was bringing back um, our Clone Saga character, um, he asked me to come on.
Oh,
And
the clone conspiracy. I read it that just recently, if that's when you're talking about.
yes, this was going back a few years,
Hmm.
and we what's his name, the clone.
Ben Riley.
Ben Riley, for some reason slipped my mind. But when Nick was going to bring back Ben Riley, he goes, Ralph, you were intimately connected with ending Ben Riley. He goes, we want to bring him back. And I said, well, Nick, I'm happy to come on as a consulting editor. I said, but I thought we got rid of him pretty effectively because we had him turn into wisps of dust and
Exactly. Just blow
destroyed.
away.
Well, somebody
Clones never die.
vacuumed up what was left of him. I don't know who it was. And so they were able to bring him back. But I was there for that. And also, I have written quite a few comics for Marvel since that time because when a film would come out, Marvel wanted an evergreen one shot done, and they would come to me to do it. So all
Okay. I've seen them.
Avengers, Captain America, quite a few. In fact, the most recent thing I did was only a few months back. I did a 10-page story for the 50th anniversary of the Eternals. There was a one shot that came out, and Mark Panicci, who was the editor, asked me to write a 10-page story. So I went back and I always loved the reject, and I didn't know if he had an origin or not, so I gave him one in there. Played around with the idea of alienation. So I still keep my hand very firmly in Marvel, doing a lot of the intros for a lot of the masterworks and all the other things they're doing too. So
That's awesome. So you are still in it, as they say.
yes, I am. Yes.
I love it. Good stuff. Well, this has been fantastic. Talk to me about what we talked a little bit in the pre-roll, but talk to me about the new project you're working on.
Okay, I have uh, Mariano Nicienza's got a new comic book company that he has put together called Apex Comics. And while I am continuing and always will be working for Marvel as long as they'll have me, and it's been 50 years now, he came to me about creating some things because he has a universe that he created called the Phaser universe. And I said I'd be happy to contribute ideas and things like that. And I've also written a children's book called Crazy Clocks. And he said, Ralph, if we work together, he goes, I have a lot of publishing connections. He goes, there's a good possibility that we could put that out as both a book and as a large, oversized comic. So that was an added inducement to work with him. In fact, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we have a conference call with a possible artist for it. So that's something that's keeping me busy. And also, I'm contributing to his universe. I'm adding some new characters. I created a female sorceress called Arianax, and I've taken some of the characters that he's created, and I'm also doing them in original stories and team ups and things like that. So that's something because he's moving along with stuff. And again, whatever comes up at Marvel, I'd be happy. I always say Marvel's my second family, and it is. But we are doing that. And he also is putting together a Kickstarter campaign, which is going to have a blind bag. These are things, by the way, I had no idea even existed until he told me about it. And he says, Ralph,
Yeah.
we can celebrate your 50th anniversary too. He goes, Marvel's doing that because in July and August they're running a 2-page spread that's going to have something about my 50 years at Marvel and a nice little piece by Brian Bendis and a little capsule history of my career. And it beats an obituary. So,
Which is often what they run. I
yeah,
notice that all the time. Somebody
notice,
passes away, and I'm reading the
oh,
latest issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and I'm like, oh, so and so died. Oh
yeah,
God.
it's like four. I noticed that there were 4 or 5 of them, and only one of them was older than I was.
Oh
So,
God.
so I said, no, I'm still here. I'm very healthy. I just have my physical, so I'll be around for a while. But the funny thing was they're running the 2-pager, and then Mariano said, we can do this. We can do this blind bag, and we said, with the Kickstarter campaign, he goes, please talk about it because he goes, you go to Kickstarter and Ralph Macchio's 50th anniversary. He goes, you can sign up for it. He goes, it's something that we would like to get people involved with. So that was something, and I thank you for the opportunity to mention that.
Oh, absolutely, and it'll be for listeners, it'll be in the show notes, of this podcast, so please click on, check it out, contribute, get signed up. Kickstarters are great. I've done a few great ones over the years. I just
Really?
did one for Michael Zek because 'cause I'm a huge fan of his. I
Yeah.
did, of course, Larry Hama's G.I. Joe one because Larry was one of my first great interviews because I G.I. Joe is my bread and butter. I just absolutely love that. So I think Kickstarters are great. It's a great opportunity to fund an artist directly for something unique and special.
Gotcha.
Um,
I never heard of it before. Mariano mentioned it when he talked about it. I said, "What's Kickstarter?" I thought it was like something you started a car with. I had no idea what he was talking about.
yeah, right.
Bags or anything like that. Now I know.
Right. Fun new stuff. Well, Ralph, thank you so much for being with me. And listeners, as always, thanks for tuning in. Please visit not only secretfriendsunite.com/spotlight and, of course, over on our Patreon page to see the huge list of wonderful people we've talked to from both Marvel and the entertainment industry, just like my guest tonight, Ralph Macchio. Ralph, thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. A pleasure, really.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast services around the galaxy, as well as video on our YouTube channel. You can support Secret Friends Unite by becoming a Patreon member, get bonus programs and more over at patreon.com/secretfriendsunite. Join our Discord community for even more discussions on all things geek. For all the latest updates on Secret Friends Unite, make sure to follow us on Threads at secret.friends.unite and visit secretfriendsunite.com. Find our merchandise at TeePublic and Redbubble. Thanks for listening, and may the Force live long and prosper.